Okay, let's unpack this. The narrative we often hear about China and Pakistan is one of, well, unwavering friendship, right?
That's the one. Higher than the Himalayas, deeper than the seas. You hear that kind of language all the time.
And yeah, who can forget those whispers about Pakistan being China's Israel? Quite a potent image.
It is. But for those of you prepping for your UPSC exams, especially with something like the recent Pahalgam terror attack fresh in mind,
Mm-hmm.
a really crucial question comes up.
Which is,
How far does this friendship actually stretch? Particularly when India enters the picture.
right. This is such an important area for, your daily UPSC mains current affairs prep. So
Yeah.
that's what we're digging into today.
It certainly is, yeah. And it demands a closer look, definitely beyond just the diplomatic pleasantries. That's vital for anyone focused on the UPSC.
So we're going to be drawing heavily on analysis from the Times of India today, trying to get at the undercurrents of this relationship.
And what it really means for India's security situation. These are key insights.
Yeah.
Could be relevant for your mains, maybe even prelims.
Exactly. Our mission today, it's not just repeating headlines. It's about cutting through the rhetoric.
Getting to the practical limits.
Yeah, the limits of China's support if things were to escalate militarily between India and Pakistan. What could Pakistan realistically count on?
That's the core question, isn't it? Trying to pull out those insights that are really valuable for understanding international relations and India's strategic environment. So vital for your UPSC work.
Okay, so we start with that powerful rhetoric, higher than the Himalayas, China's Israel. It paints this picture of a really deep, maybe even unconditional alliance.
That's the popular perception, certainly.
Yeah.
But then you have an event like the Pahalgam attack, and the immediate question becomes, okay, would Xi Jinping actually commit forces?
Or would it just be, statements from the foreign ministry?
Precisely. And diplomatically, we did see some action, didn't we? China voiced support for Pakistan after Pahalgam.
They did. Called for an impartial investigation, backed Pakistan's legitimate security concerns. Sounds pretty supportive on the face of it.
It does sound supportive.
Yeah.
But if you look closely at what Foreign Minister Wang Yi actually said, the emphasis was really on restraint.
Ah, okay.
And he stressed that conflict isn't in the fundamental interest of either India or Pakistan. That sounds more like a call for de-escalation.
It's less like a blank check for Pakistan.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating, according to the analysis, is what was happening behind the scenes at the UN Security Council.
Yes, that's a critical point, isn't it, for understanding the subtleties here. The report mentioned China and Pakistan working together to kind of water down the UNSC condemnation of the Pahalgam attack.
That's right. And apparently it was quite different, much weaker than the statement issued after the Pulwama attack back in 2019.
Okay, so what does that shift tell us, especially for someone trying to, grasp these nuances for their UPSC prep?
Well, it suggests a bit of a recalibration, maybe. A reluctance on China's part to back Pakistan so strongly that it seems, overtly anti-India.
So the behind-the-scenes stuff speaks volumes.
It really does. It hints at those limits we're trying to define. Which brings us to, well, the hard truth here.
Okay, lay it on us. What's the core argument that, say, a UPSC aspirant really needs to take away from this?
It's pretty straightforward, actually. Despite all the flowery language, all the history, Pakistan simply cannot count on unconditional support from Beijing, especially not in a military conflict with India.
And the analysis points to several reasons why that's the case.
Yes, quite a few factors.
One angle the analysis really explores is this idea of a potential miscalculation by Pakistan's army chief, General Asim Munir. What might have been his thinking?
Well, the speculation is that Munir might have seen some kind of escalation, maybe in Kashmir, as a way to distract from major problems at home.
Domestic issues, like what?
Like a tanking economy, a former prime minister in jail, and quite a bit of public unhappiness with the army's role in politics. Classic diversion tactic, perhaps.
Makes sense. And maybe he thought the world was looking elsewhere.
That's part of the calculation, too, likely. Gaza, Ukraine, everyone focused on Taiwan, U.S. politics being messy, shifting sands in the Gulf. Maybe he thought the timing was right.
That the international community wouldn't react strongly.
Possibly. And crucially, the analysis raises this possibility that Munir might have fundamentally believed that China would step in, that they would bail out Pakistan if things got tough.
But that assumption seems shaky now.
Increasingly shaky, yes. When you look at how the strategic value of Pakistan for China seems to be eroding.
Okay, let's break that down. Erosion of strategic value. Where do we see that? Afghanistan access, for instance.
Exactly. For years, Pakistan was China's main route, its intermediary for dealing with Afghanistan. But the Times of India piece points out China has now built its own direct lines to the Taliban.
They don't need Islamabad as the middleman anymore.
Pretty much. Beijing can engage directly with Kabul now, so one of Pakistan's key points of leverage. Diminished. That's a key takeaway for UPSC aspirants. China's reduced reliance there.
Okay, what about CPEC? The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. That was supposed to be the absolute cornerstone.
It was, heralded as the crown jewel of the Belt and Road Initiative. Huge expectations.
What?
But the narrative inside Chinese policy circles, it seems, has shifted quite dramatically.
How so?
It's now seen more as an expensive liability.
Wow, okay. Why the change?
The Gwadar port hasn't really developed as planned. There's the ongoing insurgency. Local communities are resentful about some projects, reports of unpaid contractors. It's not the success story they hoped for.
So instead of showcasing China's global reach, it's highlighting limitations.
Exactly, and that's a crucial insight for your UPSC prep. CPEC, once this symbol of deep partnership, is now viewed internally by China more as a burden. That affects how much political capital Beijing wants to spend on unconditionally backing Pakistan.
And the third area was military leverage against India, right? Using Pakistan to tie up India's strategic focus on its western border.
Yes, keeping India's strategic bandwidth occupied, as they say. That utility probably still exists to some extent.
But there's always a but.
But the cost for China is going up. Pakistan's own instability, the problematic links between some jihadist groups and parts of the state, that's a growing concern for Beijing.
The risk of association is getting too high.
It seems so.
Good.
Which leads directly into what the analysis suggests is China's primary fear here. It's not necessarily about India hitting back hard against Pakistan.
It's something else.
Yes. It's the potential for spillover, especially into China's own Xinjiang region.
Where Beijing has its own major concerns about Islamist extremism.
Precisely. The idea of a potential Talibanization, that increasing influence of extremist ideology within Pakistan's security structures, that's a huge red flag for China, a direct threat to their own internal stability.
And understanding that fear is critical to understanding China's calculus regarding Pakistan.
Absolutely critical.
It's also interesting how history plays into this. The 1971 war comes up as a key example in the analysis.
It does. A really important historical marker. During the 1971 Indo-Pak War, Pakistan apparently expected, or at least hoped for, Chinese military help. Intervention on their behalf.
And
It never came. The analysis even quotes an old editorial from the Pakistani newspaper, Dawn, back in 1972, warning Pakistanis not to just assume China would always back them up no matter what.
a lesson learned the hard way, perhaps.
It underscores a consistent pattern, really. China offers diplomatic cover, uses economic leverage, maybe coordinates strategically behind the scenes.
But not direct military intervention, not boots on the ground.
That seems to be the historical line. And knowing that precedent is important for UPSC aspirants trying to see the long-term dynamics.
And if you look at the current military imbalance between India and Pakistan, it just reinforces that idea, doesn't it? That Pakistan can't really count on external military saviors.
It does. India's conventional military strength, its defense budget,
Yeah.
it significantly overshadows Pakistan's.
Which pushes Pakistan towards asymmetric tactics, like relying more on its nuclear deterrent.
Exactly. It's a way to try and level the playing field. But it also highlights just how vulnerable Pakistan might be in a conventional fight without outside help.
So it all comes down to what the analysis calls China's cold strategic math. What are the key parts of that calculation making Beijing hesitant?
Well, there are several things. First, internally, Xi Jinping has been conducting these major purges within the People's Liberation Army, the PLA.
Right, removing high-ranking generals.
Yes, and that's likely raised serious questions about the PLA's actual combat readiness and, frankly, competence levels within the military.
Okay, internal PLA issues. What else?
She's also dealing with a lot on the home front, a slowing economy, those ongoing trade war pressures, particularly with the U.S., and just the massive task of securing his own political future.
So regional instability is the last thing he needs.
The very last thing. Plus, India's own role seems to be shifting in China's eyes. Well, especially after the Ladakh clashes. There's been a sense that China wants to cool tensions with India somewhat. They recognize India is a major player, vital in their broader regional strategy.
So maintaining stable ties with Delhi becomes more important.
It seems to be a priority. And you also have to remember Beijing's main focus areas.
Taiwan, South China Sea.
Exactly. Taiwan, the South China Sea, Southeast Asia. Those are the primary strategic theaters for China right now. South Asia, while definitely important, is arguably secondary to those core concerns.
Okay, so given all that, what are we seeing now? And what should we expect? India's response to Pahalgam has been pretty measured so far, hasn't it?
It has. Steps like suspending parts of the Indus Water Treaty, that's significant. And PM Modi giving the security forces a clear go-ahead to respond appropriately.
And the analysis suggests General Munir might have misread the room, miscalculated the level of Chinese backing he'd get.
That seems to be the assessment, yes. He might have misjudged the global mood and China's current priorities.
So looking ahead, what's China's likely play?
The expectation, based on the analysis, is that Beijing will probably keep offering verbal support to Pakistan. Diplomatic niceties,
But behind the scenes.
quietly urging restraint. For Xi Jinping right now, stable relations with India and focusing on China's internal consolidation and primary strategic goals. That seems far more important than any kind of deep commitment to backing Pakistan in a military fight.
That's a key prediction for UPSC aspirants to keep in mind when looking at future developments.
Definitely.
So let's try and summarize the main takeaway here, especially for you, the UPSC aspirant listening in.
Go ahead.
While that all-weather friends story between China and Pakistan is strong, it's powerful rhetoric. This deep dive suggests there are real, significant limits.
Big limits to China's willingness to give unconditional support, especially if it involves a military clash with India.
And understanding these nuances, these limits, is just crucial, isn't it? For analyzing India's foreign policy headaches and our regional security picture.
Absolutely. How this triangular relationship evolves, India, China, Pakistan, it has huge implications for India's strategic thinking, long-term planning. All vital stuff for your UPSC preparation.
Which leads us to maybe a final thought for you to chew on after this. Given the history, given China's current priorities, how should India actually factor this more nuanced understanding into its own security planning?
And its foreign policy. What proactive steps could India take, maybe, to use this evolving dynamic to its advantage?
Something to think about.
Definitely. We really hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights, particularly relevant for your UPSC work.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you found this useful, for further exploration of these kinds of critical topics, please do like, subscribe, and feel free to leave your comments or questions below. We do try to look at those.
And just to reiterate, the source material we drew on heavily for this analysis was the Times of India.